Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I wanted to end tonight's show with a tribute to relentlessness. We just have heard the story of a relentless hockey player who was desperate and interested and passionate about realizing his teenage dreams of becoming an NHL hockey player. Probably the most impactful thing that's happened in my life is the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the USSR, and that happened in this week, 32 years ago, in East Berlin, West Berlin, Germany, and soon thereafter on I think November the 17th in Czechoslovakia. And talk about relentless, for a long time, through my whole lifetime and before, people thought the Cold War would go on forever, that the USSR was one of two superpowers, that there would never be, a break in the restrictions of travel between the USSR and the rest of the world. And then in 1989, for some reason, it all unraveled, and it all unraveled unbelievably quickly. And that was 32 years ago. This year, in the summertime, there was, as I remember, a huge picnic in Hungary, and East Germans were invited to it, and so they could go from East Germany to Hungary, and from Hungary go to the West. And it was this massive amount of people that had left East Germany, had gone to Hungary, and created the initial challenges and problems for the East German government. And then during the month of October, there was a change in the presidency and the prime ministership as they grappled with economic turmoil, huge amounts of international debts, and this surge of people that were leaving East Germany going to West Germany via Hungary. And then in late October, early November, the government of East Germany contemplated, and then ultimately on, I think it was November the 9th, announced new travel restrictions, changes in restrictions that effectively on November the 9th said, and I don't think it was actually intended to be enacted right away, but that East Germans would be able to travel to West Germany. And then during a press conference late at night, it was asked by a press agent if that would apply to East Berliners going to West Berlin. And the answer was yes, but probably it wasn't supposed to be a yes. Students and others started gathering at 6 different cross points across East Berlin and West Berlin, and demanding to be let through. The guards that were, all of a sudden inundated with thousands of people that had only before ever had a few people trying to flee East Berlin, didn't know what to do, didn't know whether they should use lethal force, and were trying to get someone in authority to allow them to use lethal force, and it didn't happen. And the people started streaming through, and they were greeted on the other side of the wall by West Berliners who had champagne and then started climbing the walls. And then over the course of the next day, the wall came down, a wall that had been built back in I guess 3 decades earlier, to separate East Berlin and West Berlin, that people thought would last forever, was taken down by young people almost by an accident of history in a matter of a day. And I've got a piece of the wall. I went to Berlin. It was no longer East Berlin and West Berlin, and you could buy pieces of concrete that were parts of the wall. It was a momentous, unbelievable experience. And for all those people that for such a long period of time had wanted the end of communism or the end of the USSR, they finally got it. And then in Czechoslovakia, the whole thing happened again in the Velvet Revolution, like a week later on November the 17th, 32 years ago this week. And it's amazing that persistence, relentlessness, passion, a desire for freedom ultimately won out over what was reputed to be the second most powerful country in the world. And the USSR, in a matter of months, was no longer. And travel restrictions between East Germany, East Berlin, and West Germany, West Berlin, Czechoslovakia in the West, etc., all disintegrated. And the USSR disintegrated. And communism may still have survived in different forms, but it's not the communism that I knew when I was growing up. It's not the Cold War that I knew when I was growing up. And it's probably the most momentous change in my lifetime. There was a very famous article written about the end of history by Francis Fukuyama at that time, saying that this was the end of the clash of these two different political ideologies, and that history had decided democracy was the right system. Not sure if I agree with that. We've had a lot of struggle since then, but it certainly was impactful. And I want to end reading a quote about how it was almost accidental. In an article in the Washington Post, Mary Elise Sadat characterized the events that I've just described in an incredibly interesting and descriptive manner. She said that the series of events leading to the fall of the wall were an accident, saying, quote, "One of the most momentous events of the past century was, in fact, an accident, a semi-comical and bureaucratic mistake that owes as much to the Western media as to the tides of history." And that's how it felt. It was an unbelievable, complete surprise. And it was this botched press conference where the government new regulations were announced in a haphazard way before they were actually supposed to take place. And then the announcement of Berlin, and then a crowd at a church, and then a crowd at the wall, and then guards that couldn't get to approvals to shoot, and then students and young people that stormed the walls and stormed the cross points. And then in a day, they actually took the concrete down. And so I guess I wanted to, number one, pay a tribute to what happened in 1989, November, this week, 32 years ago in 1989, probably the most momentous thing that's happened in the world in my lifetime, as I mentioned. But also, I think it is a great example of relentlessness, how long people strived to open up the borders between East Berlin and West Berlin, between East Germany and West Germany, between the USSR and communism and the West. And the world has never been the same. It's not perfect. We haven't completely rid ourselves of that communist flavor, ideology, government, and Russia, no longer the USSR, but Russia is still obviously extremely strong and has a different political system than ours. But it's changed dramatically from the Cold War, the USSR, and the power fights that occurred between the end of World War II in 1989. And it was because of the relentlessness of regular people. There's a lesson there. Thanks. Have a great weekend, everyone. Good night.